Okay, I have to share from my Facebook page, of course. Okay, hello everybody.
Right back.
Mhm. Okay, I think we're just about to start. Hmm. Hello everybody. I see there are a number of you here. That's very good. And Rick Maynard, hi. Glad you're here. And Kay Ryan, nice to see you. Steve Wolfbrand, hello. And Jeff Denton, nice to see you again. And Steve Wolfbrand, she's live. I'm not sure there's any she who's live, but yeah, it's live. Also, Dolores Pierce. Hi, Dolores. Always nice to see you. Dale Weaver. Hi, Dale. Susan Eldridge is here too, I see. Okay, and Evelina Pont. Thank you all for coming. Please continue to share. Now, this one's going to be an important one. Tonight we have a conversation with Richard Dien Winfield, who is the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate from Georgia in what he describes as a jungle election. Not a jungle primary, a jungle election. So that's very interesting. And I'm going to bring Richard onto the screen with me now, and we will begin to tell you about it. And here is Richard Dien Winfield. But right now, when he previously ran for the House, we had, I believe, 3 or 4 conversations on separate occasions, okay, in that election. Some of you may remember him, okay, from those. Okay, but anyway, I'm going to turn the mic over to Richard now and let him tell us about the jungle election that he has entered.
Hi, greetings to everyone who's listening in. The origin of this jungle election was the resignation of Republican incumbent Senator Johnny Isakson, who left the Senate owing to illness. He was suffering from Parkinson's. And the newly elected Republican governor, Kemp, appointed a very wealthy financier named Kelly Loeffler to take Isaacson's seat until a special election was held, which by law will take place on November 3rd without any primary. And it's called a jungle election because basically candidates from any persuasion are going to be going to battle against one another all the way until November, which puts all the usual supporters in somewhat of an unusual situation. They can't wait for a primary to settle out things. At some point, they have to decide when they're going to stop sitting on the sidelines. And because there are already multiple candidates from all sides of the political spectrum, I think it's very likely that there will be a runoff. No one will get 50% of the vote plus 1. And that runoff probably will take place in December. There's a little bit of an uncertainty whether it's in December or January. But it's very possible that this race could be what decides control of the Senate. In any event, it is going to be a very important race, and it's taking place at the same time as another, not special, but ordinary Senate election is taking place in Georgia, where the Republican incumbent is coming to the end of his first 6-year term, David Perdue. And there were 6 Democrats who are contending in a primary that takes place May 19th. The mayor of Clarkston, Ted Terry, who's probably the most progressive of the lot, withdrew, leaving 3 more amply funded candidates and 2 candidates who are sort of under the radar and very, very infrequently reported on. But that is going on. And then meanwhile, there is this race that I am in. And as you may have heard, Doug Collins, the incumbent Republican from Georgia's 9th congressional district, the most solidly Republican district east of the Mississippi, where in previous elections, Republicans have garnered 87% of the vote. He has decided to enter the Senate race as well against Loeffler. But then on the Democratic side, there's already 5 people, including myself. I don't know if you want me to go through the list now, but
go through.
Yeah.
I go through at least the major candidates.
Okay, I'll give you an idea. Basically, the first person to enter was Matthew Lieberman, someone who I think was relatively unknown, but he is the son of Joe Lieberman. And thanks to that connection, he's been able to raise a sizable amount of money. I don't know whether that will help him in the long run, but at least he has a certain amount of money. I, am bound, as I was bound 2 years ago when I ran for House of Representatives in Georgia's 10th district, by the situation of being a state employee. And by law, I cannot run for statewide office until I've gone on unpaid leave. I teach philosophy at the University of Georgia, where I've been since 1982. And I can only go on leave for about a year. So I have entered this race a little bit late in January. And my situation, I think, reflects something that is worth noting, because usually when one focuses on the problem of money in our democratic system, one speaks about such things as Citizens United and the way in which PAC money is flooding into the political arena. And of course, how billionaires are now funding their own campaigns to a stupendous degree. But there's the little money problem, which has to do with employees who, of course, make up about 95% of breadwinners. And as an employee, although theoretically you have the formal right to run for office, in reality, it's extremely hard to do so, because you've got to quit your job to take on a serious race, meaning you have no income. Then you have no benefits. And in America, that's an extremely dangerous situation, since healthcare benefits are often associated with work and reasonable retirement benefits are associated with work. You lose all of that. And for most employees, you can't expect to get a job back after the race. I'm a tenured professor, so I can get my job back. If I win, then I have to resign my university position, according to the state law. But anyway, that meant I entered somewhat late. There are two, and I might mention Matthew Lieberman is not an African American. Most of the Republicans most of the Democrats in Georgia, as in most of the South, are African American. There actually are three other African American candidates who've entered.
Oh, wow.
The most prominent, supposedly, is the Reverend of Ebenezer Baptist Church, the church where Dr. King Sr. and Jr. presided. His name is Raphael Warnock. I don't think he's all that widely known, frankly. He's known in the Atlanta area. He's known within certain Democratic circles. I think there was a big hope on the part of establishment Democrats that he would be the candidate who would allow the Democrats to triumph over the Republicans, and that everyone would flock to him and everyone else in the race would pull out and leave the door open to him. But that hasn't happened, and I think the stature of Warnock may have been overestimated. There's another African American who was known to some degree, who had been a state senator. His name is Ed Tarver, had been a U.S. attorney. He's entered as well. There's another African American candidate, a woman named Tamara Shealy, who has run many times before without much success. I don't think she has much backing at all. Her main campaign point is descendant reparations. She's part of the BDOS movement. And then there's myself. So I think I will be staking myself out as the candidate who is representing what could be considered genuinely progressive ideals. The rest are various shades of establishment democratic politics.
You certainly seem to be the Bernie Sanders candidate.
Well, the Bernie Sanders, or maybe even pushing a little bit beyond Bernie Sanders. You may remember that when I ran for Congress, or I should say for the House of Representatives, the nation called me the first candidate to support a federal job guarantee. That was back when Bernie did not speak about a federal job guarantee. Now he has now embraced that idea. Of course, there are other candidates in other positions who have. AOC has. In Georgia, there's a candidate in the 7th Congressional District named Nabila Islam, who supports a federal job guarantee. It may be that Lisa Ring, who I think is in the 1st Congressional District, I think she may support it. I'm actually going to be seeing her in Savannah this weekend, and I'll find out for sure. But in any event,
she may be entering, or she may be supporting you.
No, she is running. Again, she ran 2 years ago without success, but I think she supports a federal job guarantee. I think. Yeah. I'm not sure. But Nabila Islam has that as part of her platform. And that remains part of my platform.
Yes.
And I think it's very essential, and we can discuss the ways in which it really plays a crucial role in many other important policies. It really can't be instituted without it.
Yeah, let us discuss that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take up the idea of let's say the true right to work, which I think is one of those fundamental social rights that is completely ignored in our Constitution, and that has been largely ignored in the history of our country, which has been preoccupied largely with struggles to consistently recognize and realize the political and civil rights that are stipulated in our Constitution. But with the 2 centuries of civil rights movements that have finally allowed the rights of our Constitution to be more consistently enforced, it's still obvious that that has not succeeded in eliminating social disadvantage in general and racial and gender disadvantage in particular. And as Martin Luther King pointed out, if you don't have a job and decent income, you have neither life, liberty, nor the ability to pursue happiness.
Absolutely.
Now, Roosevelt, of course, in his famous 1944 speech to Congress, at the time when, again, a watershed in the defense of freedom had been reached with the approaching defeat of fascism in Europe. Roosevelt recognized that although we had succeeded in defending our freedoms, those freedoms are not sufficient. We need in the modern world a new Bill of Rights covering these social freedoms, covering the right to work at a fair wage, the right to housing, the right to health care, the right to education at all levels, the right to legal representation, a right to culture and access to culture, etc. And this was also basically the platform that Martin Luther King was advancing in his final year. After the triumphs of the civil rights movement, he knew obviously that had not lifted the economic and general social oppression of African Americans. And so the Poor People's Campaign launched basically the same kind of agenda that Roosevelt was pointing to, and which we need to renew. So the right to work is, in a way, I think you could call it the anchor of all of the social rights, because it really provides the basis of economic independence and security. And it does so, even though obviously markets allow a few, maybe 5% of the population, to try to make a go of it as entrepreneurs or landlords. We all know if they fail, well, they're going to have to rely on what all of us have to rely upon in the last resort. Now that slavery has given all of us ownership of our own labor power, namely, we can seek a job. But the market does not guarantee us a job. And even if we're in periods of relatively low unemployment, which neoclassical economists will say is basically the lowest in unemployment can be, 3% or so, we're talking about 5 million people without jobs. We're talking about another 4.5 million people who have part-time work who want full-time. We have many millions more who are now in the so-called gig economy, with so-called zero-hour contingent piecework of various sorts, and then millions more who've given up. So we need our government to step in and do what the market can never do, namely abolish unemployment. And that requires a federal job guarantee. It's difficult for individual states or municipalities to do that, but the national government has all of our resources at its disposal. fiscal and otherwise. And it can put people to work, not competing with jobs that are in the private sector, which could just increase unemployment, but to provide the goods and services we need. And obviously, our infrastructure is crumbling. We need to make a transition to green energy. And I think we need to make that transition by 2030. We need to put people to work doing that. We need to have broadband everywhere.
Sure.
We need to refurbish all our public facilities and human services and bring culture to everywhere. And of course, we did this on a mass scale in the Great Depression as an emergency measure, but we need to make it a permanent fixture of a just society. Now, obviously, this is transformative for people struggling to gain employment. You can't end the school to prison pipeline unless you have guaranteed jobs at fair wages. You can't put the brakes on mass incarceration and recidivism unless everyone knows there is a legal way of earning a living that serves our community. You can't put an end to the sorry spectacle of homeless and jobless veterans without a federal job guarantee. But of course, it's good for the rest of us. It's good for the economy as a whole because it provides maximum consumer demand. It acts as a buffer against business cycles, since you don't have these great fluctuations in employment levels. Instead, you have a constant full employment. And that doesn't mean that businesses can't expand their workforce, but instead of drawing from a reserve army of the unemployed, they can draw from a reserve army of the employed.
Yes.
And then, of course, it lifts the fear of firing, which I think has tremendous impact on all aspects of our life. And you have to keep in mind that in America, the fear of firing is of extreme proportions, because here, if you get fired, not only is there no guarantee there'll be a job waiting for you, but you lose benefits that in most other countries you get independently of your job status.
Yes.
And here, of course, the labor movement is on the rocks with the lowest levels of unionization in our lifetimes, which means for much of our population, much of our working population, 90%, because unionization only affects 10.5% of the workforce and 6% in the private sector. That means 9 out of 10 employees are facing being fired without any grounds whatsoever. And of course, that puts a damper on being able to fight for your rights, fight against sexual harassment, racial discrimination, abuse on the part of employers, etc. So it's transformative for all of us, whether we have a job or don't have a job. But I think it's also important to see how it is a necessary measure in order to do some of the most important tasks that face us, one of which is a Green New Deal. If we are going to make this transition, which I think we have to do by 2030, to basically shut down all fossil fuel consumption and production in the United States and throughout the world, if we're going to be able to do it fairly and also gain political support for it, we need to guarantee everyone whose livelihood currently depends upon fossil fuel consumption and production that they are going to have employment awaiting them.
Absolutely.
And that has to be thought of internationally. And by the way, when I speak about employment, I should have mentioned this earlier, we need to speak about employment at a fair wage. And that's also part of what a federal job guarantee, in effect, sets the bottom of wages. And I'm very disappointed that among many progressives, there is an acceptance of the idea of a living wage as a minimum, where a living wage is thought of as basically the minimum of what you need to survive, thought of as $15 an hour. But in every American city, according to government figures, you need...
Just to make a comment on that,
Yeah.
What I often have talked about, is also a living wage.
Yeah.
When we talk about a living wage,
Yeah.
I'm not talking about, a minimum wage. I'm talking about a living wage, which I think, is what you mean by a fair wage.
Well, I want to add something else. I mean, it's not just a genuinely living wage where you can actually rent an apartment or have a place to live and be able to meet most of your needs, has to be higher than $15 an hour.
It absolutely does.
And I think it has to be at least 20 or more.
Hour.
But the other idea of a fair wage is that wages
is a way in which the job guarantee, that you advocate for is different, from Bernie Sanders, the job guarantee, because he is still sticking with the $15 an hour, which may have been somewhat adequate in 2012 when talk, of a minimum wage at the $15 an hour actually started, but which certainly is not adequate anymore. It wasn't even adequate in 2018.
I mean, I think there's still an element of fairness and justice that has to do with not the level of the wage, and that can include, for example, keeping up with inflation. But for it to really be fair, it should be something where, shall we say, all boats rise with the rising prosperity of the nation, which means we want to adjust it with regard to the degree in which our productivity increases, our national productivity levels. And when you include that, then you put the brakes on increasing income and wealth inequality, which a minimum wage at some set level does not do. And I think that's a very fundamental principle that has to be part of the federal job guarantee and a fair minimum wage. And the other side of it is that this so far, at one blow, wipes out unemployment and poverty wages. But we also have to deal with the poverty income that is the fate in our society of those who are either retirees or disabled. Because if you look at the benefits that Social Security provides, they're not living wages, let alone fair wages. The average benefit for a disabled person is $1,200 a month. The average benefit for a retiree on Social Security is $1,400 a month. These are almost as bad as Andrew Yang's universal basic income of $1,000 a month, which is dire poverty and an invitation to homelessness. So what I propose, and I think we should as a matter of justice, is that if we set a fair minimum wage as something starting at above 20 and rising with the rates of national productivity, retirees and the disabled should receive equivalent replacement income. And if we do that, then we wipe out poverty income in its entirety. And we are in a new arena.
So let me ask a question.
Yeah.
The obvious question, I think, is that we have regional cost of living differences
Sure.
The country.
Yeah.
So the buying power, of $20 an hour, is not equivalent, in New York City to Athens, Georgia, for example. What I have always advocated is CPI adjustments of the living wage, so that the area differences are taken account of.
Sure.
So older people do not have to move, leave their families, leave their children, go to Florida, or go to a rural area far distant from where they came from. That's unfair, and unjust.
Sure. I mean, I think, though, that many of these regional differences have to do with certain issues concerning housing costs,
They do.
healthcare costs of childcare and elder care, which would be eliminated if we fulfill other parts of the social rights agenda.
I think that you're right to some degree there. Certainly, if we made internet available, in all areas, and job guarantee available, that would be lifting the boats of people, in rural areas, and would improve economies there. And cost of living differences would tend to level out over a period of time. But if we put in a cost of living adjustment from the start, then that cost of living adjustment would continue in effect
Yeah.
And as the areas became, a lot more equal, the cost of living in them would also become, a lot more equal, and the adjustment would be smaller.
Now, I think, by the way, one often doesn't think about the importance of the federal job guarantee with regard to other programs, not just the Green New Deal, but also Medicare for all.
Yes.
Because if we are to move to Medicare for all, which I think we should, I think it is, there are important reasons why it is the most practical and best way of securing healthcare as a right in our country. I'll just briefly go through them because I think, unfortunately, you don't hear Bernie Sanders or other defenders of healthcare, of Medicare for all, really making the arguments usually. But on the one thing, of course, it covers everyone in the same manner. It gives you maximum freedom to go to any healthcare provider you want, unlike private insurance programs.
Yes,
It gets rid of all the overhead costs of a multiplicity of insurance plans. And of course, with for-profit insurance plans, you have to deal with super salaries of CEOs, dividends to shareholders, advertising, and all sorts of other overhead costs, which get eliminated. And you're in the strongest position to bargain with pharmaceutical companies, healthcare providers, to get our prices down in line with the rest of the developed world. But one thing one has to keep into account is that if we do move to Medicare for all, which I think we should, there are people who are going to lose their livelihood, namely people in the private insurance industry, health insurance, and all the people in those bloated clerical staffs of healthcare providers who've had to deal with administering, this
absolutely.
different thing. A federal job guarantee solves that problem because it ensures that these people, like those people who work in the fossil fuel industry, will not have to worry about becoming destitute. They will have a chance. And I think the same thing applies to comprehensive immigration reform. There are many people who make this argument. We all hear it all the time that the undocumented are doing the jobs that Americans don't want to do. Now, that may be true that they're doing jobs I don't want to do, or you don't want to do, or many other relatively affluent Americans do not want to do. But the jobs they're doing were done by people who are not undocumented immigrants. And a case in point is here in Athens, that, which, by the way, is the poorest city of its size in America.
Oh my God.
And has a particularly impoverished African-American population.
How
And African-American,
large is Athens?
what's that?
How large is Athens?
Athens has been growing actually quite a bit recently. It has now about 125,000 people and a little metro area of maybe a couple hundred at most. It has this very large state university, but that's really, of course, one often speaks about such institutions as being a boon to a community, but it works the other way because although, tenured professors and administrators get a decent livelihood and football coaches get a spectacular livelihood, the other staff are paid very poorly. The university owns an immense amount of property and pays no taxes on it because it's a state institution. And of course, it makes use of a lot of city services, so it doesn't help the livelihood of most people. But around Athens, you have these chicken processing plants.
Yes.
Which at a certain point became basically factories that employed almost entirely African Americans. Then over a certain period of time, Hispanic and many undocumented people began working there, not because they stole anyone's job, but the employers decided to use them and take advantage of them. And then when Trump began terrorizing the immigrant population, many of these workers left the area in fear of deportation. And then African Americans are coming back into these places. So what I'm getting at is basically, if we're really going to have comprehensive immigration reform and give legal status to the undocumented, which I think we should, because after all, we haven't been enforcing our laws. They've been making their lives here. We are the ones who perpetrated this drug war in Latin America and trade agreements that impoverish the peasantry, et cetera. And our gun policies have allowed the cartels to arm themselves to the teeth. But we need a federal job guarantee so that people know that when we give normal status to the undocumented, no one's livelihood will be in jeopardy. And I think one of the striking things about the otherwise very, let's say, caring societies of social democratic regimes in Europe, Northern Europe in particular, which have tremendous benefits of all sorts, much of the kind of things that Bernie Sanders and myself are in favor of, like free higher education, free childcare, etc. They don't have guaranteed jobs. And so we see a rise of a fascist right in all of these countries. Because, well, on the one hand, refugees are streaming into these countries because they are affluent countries. But because they don't have guaranteed jobs, the population there is fearful for their economic security. They may get terrific unemployment benefits, but that's not the same thing as having a job. And I think that is a key element in why there is this rise of the right, and of course, demonizing immigrants and refugees. And we see it even in countries that have otherwise had very, let's say, progressive social policies, but they lack the idea of guaranteed jobs.
Right. This idea is so central and so important and so transformative. That
now, I think, by the way, another thing that's transformative we have to keep in mind is that when we speak about work, we also want to speak about the empowerment of employees. And I think, you know as I know, that, I mean, not only has there been really a huge acceleration in the disempowerment of employees and the decline of the labor movement due to such things as globalization, due to the rise of the gig economy, but it's also due to the policies of those parties and the Democratic Party, which claims to be a friend of labor. Because after all, what has the Democratic Party done since the Wagner Act that has really changed that in any way levels the playing field between employees and employers? So I think we really have to rethink this. And I have two proposals that I think would really change things. One is, instead of having unionization operate as it does according to the Wagner Act, the NLRB, where unions first have to sign up people and get a certain number of cards, et cetera, why shouldn't we have automatic elections for representation? We have automatic elections for political representation.
Yeah, we certainly.
It's a fundamental social right. It should be given that any enterprise that has multiple employees, including contract employees, including gig employees, including part-timers, they should be required to hold elections for employee representatives with which management will be required to engage in collective bargaining. And then so we have 100% unionization. And then on top of that, we need to fill 50% of the seats of corporate boards with non-managerial employees elected by their peers. That will change things from within.
About co-determination.
Exactly. Worker co-determination, which was introduced in Germany, in the Weimar Republic, and has been followed by other countries, many of which, of course, have the strongest manufacturing sectors.
Yes, they do.
And have the highest paid workers in the world.
Yes, and they're very competitive.
Exactly.
Well.
Yeah. So I think these are measures that we have to think about as key measures of social rights. And then the other side of it, which is important, is how we balance work and family. And I think our failure to do so is one of the reasons why, even though, women have had the vote for more than 100 years, and we've had for 50 years legislation requiring equal pay for equal work, there still is a tremendous deficit in pay and wealth of women and retirement benefits and of power, both economic and political. And I think a huge part of that is the fact that we have not balanced work and family, and that women who, both for biological reasons and cultural reasons, bear the biggest burden of caring for children and elders. The fact that we haven't made proper adjustments for that puts them at a huge disadvantage in terms of economic and political livelihood and power. And there are specific policies that can address this. I mean, for example, with regard to work, we need to have paid leave, not just 8 days paid leave, but paid leave for whatever medical emergencies you have. And I think we should have at least 9 month paid parental leave. We need to have 1 month paid vacations like they do in the European Union, so you can spend some time with family. We need to ban, for example, mandatory overtime, which is illegal in almost every developed nation, but not here in America, where your employer can tell you, you better come to work, for another 5 hours or you'll be fired, which is not good for the family, let alone for one's health and sanity. And then we need free public childcare, elder care. And another thing that has to do with cost of living and the question of what a fair minimum wage does not itself achieve. You have to take into account that people who have more dependents need more income. So I think we do need child allowances. And according to the government's figures, we need about $900 per month per child. And I think on all of these benefits, they should be given to everyone without any needs tests or anything like that.
Yeah, so do
Just
I.
like we treat public schools.
Oh, wow. I think I'm getting an echo now. Am I not?
I'm not hearing it.
Good. Okay.
Unless you're saying, I'm saying what you would say, which may well be true.
No, I don't think I'm getting that kind of echo.
Okay. All right.
Okay. You are saying something very similar to what I would say.
Yeah.
Our views are
Yeah.
extremely close together in most ways. But I was talking about the technical echo and the sound system.
Yeah. I mean, I think another issue on which all of these factors have a huge role, which is not really recognized by most people, is how genuine reproductive freedom really can only be achieved through the measures that have just been laid out. In other words, reproductive freedom is not just a matter of having the right to an abortion. Of course, you can have the right to have an abortion, not be able to pay for it. So, Medicare for all can solve part of that. But then there are two other sides. You don't have reproductive freedom if you have an unwanted pregnancy. You don't have reproductive freedom if you can't have the children you want. Well, Medicare for all can reduce unwanted pregnancies to a minimum by providing free access to contraceptives, day-after pills, pregnancy tests, etc. But then we also have to think about how we can eliminate the situation where women and parents in general are not able to have the children they want because they don't feel they can afford it or pursue their careers. So all the measures balancing work and family, federal job guarantee, plus fair wages and worker empowerment, all of these things provide what makes it possible for people to have the children they want. And if you combine that with what Medicare for all will do, you actually end up not only giving people maximum reproductive freedom, but you also reduce abortions to as much as is humanly possible. Contrary to the pro-life movement that wants to ban abortions, which only drives them underground and puts in jeopardy the health of women, particularly poor women, who can't get proper procedures. So I think you eliminate this phony opposition between pro-choice and pro-life. Because if you have real pro-choice, supported by guaranteed jobs and Medicare for all and balancing work and family, you do end up, reducing abortions to the least that is possible by human beings.
What I like about the way you are presenting this is that it's so intersectional.
Exactly.
So intersectional.
Yeah.
Everything connects everything else. And
now, there's one part that we haven't put on the table. We still haven't talked about housing, which we can do.
The whole thing.
But maybe I shouldn't jump the gun.
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the thing that is really the capstone to all of the fulfillments of social rights is ensuring that everyone has access to the resources they need to go to court and defend their rights. And that is absolutely crucial.
It is.
And because otherwise, the rights you have are on paper alone. And now we, of course, know that our legal system is corrupted by money at all levels. Cash bail is, a kind of supreme example where you can buy your way out of jail if you have enough money, but if you don't have the money, you're stuck in jail, which means you lose your job, you lose your housing, you lose custody of children often, your marriage goes to pieces, etc. We have for-profit prisons and parole services, whose business model is contrary to justice because it wants to have as many people in prison as possible for as long as possible and treat them as miserably as possible. And then also we have plea bargaining. 95% of people who have criminal charges end up being plea bargained, which means there is no judicial process that investigates the facts of the case. And that's kind of a highway to mass incarceration. In continental legal systems, there are no pleas. If you have charges brought against you, there is a trial. And we look at the cases, the facts. And I think that's how it should be. But underlying all of these things is the fact that, our Constitution only guarantees legal representation in criminal cases, not in civil. And in criminal cases, the way it's handled, as we all know, is by poorly paid, overburdened, legal aid lawyers or court-appointed lawyers, a smattering of pro bono lawyers. So essentially, if you have to rely on that, you don't have your dream team. You get the short end of the stick, and you're on your way to prison. And then, of course, in civil cases, which are just as important and which are crucial for any kind of sexual harassment, any kind of discrimination on the job, any kind of problems with employers or landlords or banks or healthcare providers or family matters, 85% of us never have legal representation in civil cases. So there is a remedy. And I think the remedy, which I don't hear anyone promoting, is one that seems so obvious to me because it builds upon the idea of Medicare for all, a single payer health insurance. You apply that to legal services.
Yes.
You have a single payer legal insurance system, what I call legal care for all, where you have a public insurance system, and I'll speak about how all of these things can be funded or whatever. You have it so that you go to any lawyer you choose for any personal, criminal, or civil advice and legal representation. And, our nation as a whole negotiates with the legal profession to have reasonable costs. And we have, in a sense, a kind of new birth of freedom. We're all really equal before the law. No longer can employers or people in work situations where there are those who have power and those who don't, act with impunity in harassing people sexually, discriminating racially, etc. I think this is a key thing, together with eliminating the fear of firing through guaranteed jobs and employee empowerment, that really changes the whole framework. If you really want to solve the problem that the Me Too movement has exposed of the tremendous degree of impunity with which sexual harassment takes place in work situations and discrimination against people because of their sexual orientation and gender identity, etc., you need to put this all together. You need to have guaranteed jobs at fair wages to lift the fear of firing and union representation. You need to have legal care for all. And then we are really in a different kind of society.
Yes, we are.
And all of it is doable. All of it is feasible. It's just a question of our political will.
Okay, so please now shift a little bit and talk some about the specifics of the Green New Deal aspect of things. Because there, of course, we are facing an existential crisis.
Yep.
And as you say, we do have to have things fully under control by 2030.
I think so.
A lot of work to do in just a very, very short time.
Yeah.
So please talk about this.
Yeah. Now, first of all, we have to really come to grips with the fact that this is not just a domestic, but an international problem. Even though we in the United States have been responsible for a vastly disproportionate share of global warming in the past, we are now being outpaced by other countries, China in particular, India as well. And even though many of these nations are pushing ahead in sizable ways to develop green energy sources, they are at the same time pushing ahead with fossil fuel production and consumption. And another example is Japan, for example, and Germany, both of which, in the case of Germany, for sort of, I guess, political reasons. In the case of Japan, because of the event of the tsunami that caused the meltdown in one of their nuclear plants. They're shutting down their nuclear plant industry, and they're building a huge number of coal-fired plants, which are going to produce more, fossil fuel warming gases in our atmosphere than the entire production of such things by the United States energy industry. So I think we have to recognize we are in a crisis. The technology is there. I think you and I are of the generation more or less where, our parents grew up at a time when Einstein and others, Lazard, approached Roosevelt and told him, look, we've got to develop an atom bomb before the Nazis get it. And this was done within 5 years. We were growing up when JFK said, look, we're going to get someone to the moon within a decade, and it was done. Here we have a decade to shut down the fossil fuel industry and consumption in America and hopefully in most of the world. It can be done. And I think
we win in 2021.
Yeah.
If we don't win 2021 with enough of a Congress to get this started, as well as a president to get this started, then we will have even less time than that.
No, that's for sure. I mean, I think what we can start with is, first of all, we shut down all fossil fuel exploration.
Yes.
There should be no fossil fuel exploration.
Right. No
there
more.
Should be no pipelines being constructed here or anywhere else. Now, of course, to do that, as well as other measures, which we need to look at, it's crucial that we think about the New Deal side of the Green New Deal, and in particular, job guarantees. Because for political reasons and matters of justice, we have to ensure that everyone whose livelihood depends upon what we are shutting down knows they have a job awaiting them at a fair wage.
Right.
And that has to be done internationally. We have to think about this as an international program.
Them to have a life.
Exactly.
You have to know that they're going to have a life.
Yeah. Now, it turns out that the amount of employment in these industries is not that much. In coal production, for example, now the amount of coal workers in the United States is falling below 60,000. At the height of employment in coal, which was under John Lewis's reign, I think it was in the 1920s, it was, I think, 780,000. So there's been a precipitous decline, and it's because of mechanization.
Yes.
Using these giant trucks and open pit mining. We're talking about a very, very small number of workers now, really.
Something like 60,000 or so now.
Yeah, it's 60,000 and dropping. So it's not that difficult to give them jobs in other things, including
yes,
energy.
It's a drop in the bucket.
And I think in terms of oil exploration industry, again, these things are very mechanized. It can be done. It can be done, and it can be done internationally, and we need to find a way of doing that. I think also, we have to ensure that countries like China and India, and of course, countries in Latin America, Asia, Africa, that they're able to grow their energy, which they all need in order to develop and to provide decent standard of livings, rising standard of livings for the people. We have to enable them to do so, but to do so without expanding fossil fuel consumption and production, and to eventually get rid of it as soon as possible. But that means we have to provide them with both a lot of carrots and a certain amount of sticks. We have to allow, for example, all of the petrochemical states all those Middle Eastern, kingdoms that are repining on these seas of oil, they have to reinvent themselves in a decade. Now, they should have been doing this on their own, and they have plenty of money to assist them in doing so. But we, on the other hand, can push them and also help them to do so. And that has to be a big part of our foreign policy. And it has to be tied to an international New Deal.
Yes.
Because we have to ensure that it is possible to do this in a way that is politically tenable, meaning that their people have a decent livelihood awaiting them. And in connection with this, I think it's short-sighted to dismiss nuclear energy. Obviously, one thing we have to do, we have to solve the problem of how to dispose of nuclear waste. And I think you know that Obama embarked on a program that Trump is continuing of spending $1 trillion to refurbish our nuclear weapons.
Mm.
Instead of doing that, let's take $100 billion of that trillion and invest in figuring out how to solve the problem of nuclear waste. Take another 100 billion or 200 billion and invest in research in fusion power. Put some more hundreds of billions into figuring out how we can have much safer nuclear reactors which can't be used for nuclear proliferation. Because I think we're making a mistake in writing off the technical possibilities of nuclear energy. Obviously, it has these two problems of the waste, the possibility of meltdowns, the possibility of nuclear proliferation. But I'm not convinced that these are problems that cannot be vastly diminished, if not solved, technologically with sufficient research. And of course, fusion power is a completely different kettle of fish if it could be made practical. But I think we need to research these things and not just dismiss it out of hand. But on the other hand, we have to push all the other energy sources as much as we can. And I think I don't think that such things as carbon taxes are sufficient, these kind of market incentives.
No, they're not sufficient.
But I think we have to set by law a deadline. We have to tell the fossil fuel industry, you have until 2030 to shut down. We have to tell oil refineries, you have to stop refining fossil fuels by 2030. You have to shift to biofuels if you're going to do refining. And I think technologically, we can fly airplanes, we can have diesel trains, we can have all of these things operating, including internal combustion engines, using biofuels, which are completely renewable. And this, of course, can be a boon to agriculture throughout the world if it's properly handled in a way that doesn't compete with food things. Of course, the other side of this, we have to think about the way in which we are destroying much of the environment throughout the world, including food stocks, allowing agribusiness to diminish the variety of crops and so forth. There are many kinds of things we have to do in terms of the way in which we're producing all kinds of environmental corruption, in addition to global warming itself.
Yes.
And these have to be done internationally and on a massive scale. So I see this as really the primary international task and should be the focus of our foreign policy, to really push an international Green New Deal with all of the kind of social rights advocacies that have to go along with it, and make this part of any trade deal we're involved in, and all our relationships with every other nation.
So speak a little more about how this would interweave with trade policy.
Well, look, I think that we need to develop trade policies in such a way that we penalize and reward nations for making the transition to clean energy. And that, clearly we have to do this by cooperating with other nations. I think, first of all, we have to face the reality that the power of the United States, its economic power, its scientific power, even its military power, is waning, and we're in a period of historical transition. Whereas China and India and other nations achieve levels of prosperity that are coming closer to ours, our slice of the pie is going to be diminishing.
Yes, it has to diminish, and
And
it's
should diminish.
okay that it does diminish because although we are a large nation and there are 330 million people here now, there are 1.5 billion people, okay, in India.
Yeah.
Okay, I believe the population of China, okay, is a little less than India now,
Yeah.
1.3 billion or so, but population in both of those areas dwarfs that of the United States.
So
So,
think that, think
so
what happens when they have
they
an
should
economic
charge
performance like us.
high.
Now, in a sense, as a matter of justice, obviously, we don't want the rest of the world to be living in squalor, to be living in levels of far diminished prosperity compared to ourselves and countries in Europe and Japan.
Because
But
it's a recipe for war.
yeah, on the other hand, we don't want to find ourselves in a world where the new economic giants are one-party dictatorships or Hindu nationalist nations verging on fascism,
Yes.
right? And and in a certain sense, I think this has implications for what we think of as our immigration policy. I mean, I think of my own lifetime. When I was born, the U.S. had a population of 150 million.
Yes, I remember those times.
Great Britain had a population of about 50 million. Now we have 330. Britain has now, UK has 65 million.
Yes.
Now, what has allowed us to continue to be, shall we say, a great power and an influential power?
Is immigration.
Exactly. It's not that we propagate like rabbits, it's immigration. And if we are in any respect to maintain our influence,
We have to have
maintain,
immigration.
and maintain our influence for the good, which hopefully we could do if we fulfill our social rights and maintain some modicum of democracy, it requires immigration. Now that doesn't mean we're adding to the population of the planet. We're talking about population transfers, if anything. But I think, on the one hand, there's nothing wrong with the United States power waning to the extent that other nations gain the prosperity they deserve. On the other hand, we don't want to be in a world dominated by undemocratic regimes and regimes that themselves involve advancing inequalities of all sorts.
Yes.
So in a sense, our own ability to influence the world depends upon immigration, as it has throughout our history.
But certainly does. We also don't want to be involved with a foreign policy that is continually sanctioning on other nations
Sure.
merely because their foreign policy does not agree with ours, okay, or their view of their domestic interests is not the same as our view, okay, of their domestic interests.
I mean, I think there are two things that we have to deal with other nations, and to deal with them in a sense in isolation from all other considerations. One is in interacting with other nations to promote the transition to green energy, the Green New Deal, and to do it, irrespective of other issues. And the other thing has to do with nuclear proliferation and a move toward nuclear disarmament. I mean, I think that is a huge problem that we need to deal with, because we are, on the cusp of a possible explosion of proliferation.
I know.
I mean, Trump is driving Iran to develop nuclear weapons. If and when they do, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and then Egypt will do the same. And, the world will become a much more dangerous place. And I think today, the development of surveillance is such that it is technologically feasible to actually implement total nuclear disarmament if we have the will to do so. I mean, nations cannot hide what they're doing, I don't think, or at least we're reaching that point. And the United States and Russia should immediately engage in vast reductions of our nuclear arsenals, which could be the basis for then negotiations with every other nuclear power to drastically reduce their arsenals. I mean, we should not have in any country an individual who has a button to push that can launch nuclear warfare. And to eliminate that, we have to eliminate the threat of first strikes.
Yes.
And we can if we reduce the number of weapons sufficiently, so that no nation is going to have the power to engage in a new first strike that will allow them to be invulnerable to a counterattack. And I think that's crucial to be done. And on that basis, we could then actually move towards nuclear disarmament if we have a strong enough international alliance that is really going to clamp down on any nation that violates it,
Yes.
and to have a sufficient degree of surveillance. And I think these are issues that have sort of been put on the back burner and are being ignored. But I think we're going to regret not paying attention to this.
Okay, so let's move a little bit to another subject and ask a question which people are certainly going to ask of you in the campaign.
Yeah.
Which is your programs for people.
Yeah.
Are certainly very, very attractive, very noble in relation to the justice that they seek. But, of course, and here comes the question everybody delights in asking, how will we finance these very expansive programs over the next 10 years?
I mean, first of all, I think one has to take into account the extent to which these programs pay for themselves to a significant degree. For example,
well, what do you mean by pay for themselves?
Yeah. In other words, when you have a federal job guarantee, first of all, it, together with fair wages and employee empowerment, it, in a way, is going to eliminate the need for much of our welfare system. And we pay both federal and states and municipalities $1 trillion a year on various forms of welfare. And all of that, in a sense, is superseded when we fulfill these various social rights agendas. Secondly, we should be saving half of what we spend on healthcare if we have Medicare for all that succeeds in doing what it has done in other countries, which is to reduce costs in half of what we spend. That means we save each year $1.7 trillion.
Right.
So potentially there's a saving of almost $3 trillion, which is about half of all public spending each year.
Question. Okay. The view that we can save the 50% of our national health spending, okay, is a view that you and I share.
Yeah.
But I often do not say quite that. And the reason why I don't say that, okay, well, first of all, I do want to introduce one corrective. Okay, and that is that when I looked at the projections of what national healthcare spending was going to be in 2019, okay, last time, okay, I looked at them.
Yeah.
The costs were projected at 3.8 trillion as opposed to 3.4 trillion.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was even more than that.
Yeah.
Okay, 50% of that is 1.9 trillion, okay, clearly. So we're talking about savings in total national health spending of $1.9 trillion per year. Over 10 years, that's a savings, okay, of $19 trillion that can go to other things, okay, certainly enormous. But just this week, there was a study that appeared, okay, in Lancet. Okay, I believe it was a Yale University study. And it correctly estimated, I think, that the fatalities per year that would due to our lack, okay, of a Medicare for all system, essentially lack of a bill like HR 1384
Yeah.
at this point, was the fatalities, okay, that it estimated were 68,000 fatalities per year. Okay, I generally agree with that estimate. Okay, because in terms of the way I think about this, there are at least 40,000 fatalities that are probably due to lack of insurance completely. And there are quite a number of fatalities which are due to lack, okay, of adequate insurance. So people don't go to see doctors and
Yeah.
such. And so they don't actually take care of things, okay, when they're at an early stage. And so then they die. So I think the 68,000 is but probably right. But what the study also estimated was that the savings that we could expect per year were only 400 billion per year. And I'm not sure how they came up with that estimate. Okay, the study was behind a paywall. Okay, I didn't want to pay for the article, but there are a variety of other studies. Okay, of course, the Mercatus study, which came up with a $2 trillion saving. Okay, over what to be.
Yeah.
Oh, this particular study, the Lancet study, came out with 4 trillion. The University of Massachusetts, at Amherst, came out with something that was more in the neighborhood of $7 to $10 trillion, I guess. There have been two studies that have come out, okay, at the University, okay, of Massachusetts, and they vary somewhat. The way I have always thought of this, okay, is that the people who are trying to figure our savings from going to Medicare for all
Yeah.
using the bottom up approach. And because they fear the slings and arrows of the conservatives, they generally introduce a conservative bias in estimating how much we would save at every step. And since they're using the bottom up approach, the errors compound. Okay? And it seems to me they shouldn't be using the bottom up approach. What they should be doing is using an empirical approach, okay, and looking at what the experience has been in other nations
Sure.
that have a Medicare for All program. And we do see from other nations that some of them are saving 50% of GDP of their healthcare spending, taken as a percentage, okay, of GDP compared to us. Some are spending even less than that. For example, Taiwan is spending less than that, okay, as a percentage, okay, of GDP. Some nations are spending more, but Canada spends, okay, about 11%, okay, it's a GDP, but compared to ourselves. Other nations that uh, do have a universal healthcare system, okay, but not a Medicare for all system. It's still a private insurance-based system, which is extremely tightly regulated, like let's say Switzerland, okay, and Germany. Okay, I think that one spends perhaps 12%, okay, of GDP, and Switzerland, I think, is the most expensive right now at roughly 13%, okay, of GDP. We, on the other hand, okay, are at 18%, okay, of GDP. Uh, okay, so that's the approach, okay, that I prefer. I think it's really kind of a waste of time, okay, to go into the nitty gritty of every little thing that could be saved, okay, in a long list of 30 categories or something like that, okay, and then try to aggregate up. Okay, I think it's much better to look at the experience, okay, of other people. Okay, so what do you think about this?
Yeah. I mean, I think, look, that experience is there. And that is sort of the basis of the kind of figures I'm referring to. And I think that we know what the performance of these healthcare systems has been. They're better than our healthcare system in the outcomes, and cheaper, right? So we're not talking about cheap systems that are failing to provide adequate healthcare. They're offering better outcomes than we have, and so that's part of why I think the question of funding, we have to put it first of all in perspective of what the magnitude would be. And another side of it, by the way, is that when we think about what a federal job guarantee does, it's providing goods and services, and presumably there's no reason to think that the work provided by people who are employed by the federal job guarantee program will not match normal standards of productivity. And after all, if people are not doing the work, they won't be paid, right? It's not as if they're there to just sit around on their hands.
Oh, yes, I completely agree with that.
So that means the value of what they produced should be at least equal, or we would expect it to be at least equal to the costs of their wages plus the overhead that goes into it.
Yes, in fact, it should be more than equal in terms of GDP. Indeed, I expect it to have a multiplier effect, some sort, especially when compared with the system, of unemployment.
Exactly.
We can probably expect, a multiplier effect if we take into account the primary multiplier, secondary multiplier, and tertiary multiplier. We're probably talking about a 3-to-1 gain in terms of dollars spent by the federal government. So if the federal government is spending on that, let's say a total of 600 billion a year, that would probably translate to a gain in GDP of $1.8 trillion. And the national income will be delivered to people who are more or less at the bottom of the scale. And so there's tax revenue that's coming in from that. Okay, now, of course,
they're spending much more of their income than the upper crust and having more of a multiplier effect.
Yes,
well.
The marginal propensity to consume, as they say, is much greater. I'm not an economist. I just play one on television or on Facebook. Okay, I'm a political scientist, actually.
Now, I wrote a book after my last campaign where I tried to lay out these policies, to some degree, a little philosophical basis for them, and tried to, in the final chapter, calculate what the actual cost of this would be. And I don't have the figures in my head. It's going to be coming out hopefully in a month or two under the title Democracy Unchained. But essentially, there was a cost. It wasn't that huge. It was what's that? It's being published by a local publisher called Deeds Publishing. And it'll be fairly inexpensive ebooks and paperback, whatever. I'll let you know the information when I have it, the end number and the like. But I do the calculations there based upon what I think all of these things would cost and the like. And like you, I do share the view that it's possible to deal with public investments by increasing the money supply, provided in doing so, one allows for sufficient economic expansion to counter any inflation. The same thing with regard to borrowing and debt and deficit spending. One can do that, provided one is making productive investments, so that the rate of debt payments does not exceed the economic growth that it generates. It's not really a problem in any respect. But I think it's good to tax, especially when you have the obscene wealth and income inequality. And so I think it's good
It's not only good to tax, but it's also true that that kind of wealth inequality is a threat to our political system. It's almost mandatory that if we're going to survive as a democracy, that we do something about that threat.
And of course,
right now, and in Bloomberg's entry into the campaign, the idea that he
Yeah,
can simply buy in,
yeah,
okay, in this way, okay, and it's never even a matter, okay, of whether he himself actually becomes the nominee. He doesn't have to become the nominee to win.
yeah,
All he has to do is to prevent the nomination of Bernie Sanders on the first round.
yeah,
Okay, and then if someone else is chosen, and someone else will probably be chosen, simply because the Democratic Party won't want to be seen as, choosing the plutocrat, okay, in any direct way. But if someone else, okay, is chosen, and that someone is, is willing to protect the wealth, okay, of Bloomberg, okay, and others like him, then he wins.
yeah.
He
Well,
wins
I've been seeing it actually,
in ways for
as
years.
part of my campaign, I've been going around as much as I can to meetings of, for example, county Democratic organizations, particularly in the Atlanta metro area. And in the last week or so, uh, Bloomberg employees are showing up all over the place
Oh
to
yeah,
speak about his campaign, and they're setting up offices all over the place. No other presidential campaign is doing anything comparable.
sure. Well,
You see nothing that can compare to it.
he's already spent $400 million.
Yeah, sure, sure. But I think there is this problem of how it undermines, uh, as it is undermining and has undermined equal political opportunity on which democracy depends. It also is a drag on the economy. There was an article in Sunday's business section of the New York Times discussing what is causing malls to fail. And the article pointed out it's not just e-commerce, it's not just big boxes, big box stores. A huge part of it is the growing degree of income and wealth inequality,
Hmm.
because the purchase power of everyone but the rich is declining. And this is hitting the malls and causing them to fail. So I think for this reason, it's important to use taxes to diminish wealth and income inequality. And I think the figures are such that one could, I think, very feasibly put the entire tax burden for every public investment on the top 10%, and particularly the top 1% of income and wealth, and have complete tax relief for the bottom 90%. And I think the figures allow for that. And I think, generally speaking, if you think about the job of a legislator, um, I think the job of a legislator should be to come up with laws that are fairly simple, that can actually be read and written by legislators, that
It's
could be read by the public, not by,
good. Understood.
and not be written by lobbyists as they are today. And that in terms of tax laws, I mean, you really want to be setting up the basic framework and principle so that you can leave it to the IRS to work out the details. But you just say, okay, we're going to put the entire tax burden on this portion of the gradations in wealth and income. And the rates will be determined to be whatever they need to be to cover whatever we want to have covered in order to make these public investments. And I think there's no problem to covering it all and having complete tax relief for the bottom. I don't think we need to speak of Medicare for all having to be paid in the way that, through payroll taxes and the like. We shouldn't even have payroll taxes.
Yes, I
I mean,
remember.
as has been pointed out by Ray, payroll taxes are good for robots because robots don't pay any. It helps the introduction of robots in place of workers. I mean, why have payroll taxes? Let's get rid of them. After all, people who aren't employees don't pay them. Let's put the entire tax burden on this top 10% and 1% in particular. And after all, since the top 1% has now almost twice as much wealth as the bottom 90%, the top 10% has more than twice as much wealth as the bottom 90%. And income is not as skewed, but it's pretty skewed. It wouldn't even require that high a wealth tax to cover what is necessary. And that would
Wow.
have the salutary effect of enhancing our democracy and
Um,
increasing
calculations in,
productivity. What's that?
have you offered the calculations in your book?
A little bit. I mean, I come up with a figure that would do the job of what it could be, and it's not that high. There is this kind of funny um, fact that I came across in looking at wealth taxation. In fact, I think you find it in a Wikipedia article on wealth taxation, and that's that someone named Donald Trump had proposed a wealth tax of 50%, 15% on people who had wealth of $50 million or more. He proposed it as a one-time tax that he said would wipe out the national debt. This was a long time ago, but I thought it was quite interesting.
It is.
And many people speak about, well, wealth tax will be very difficult to implement. Now, admittedly, there could be a constitutional issue because, as I think we know, when the income tax was instituted, it was declared unconstitutional.
I remember.
Because there's this clause in the Constitution which says that taxes have to be proportional to in a sense, the population of states and the like, which the income tax would not really align with. So they had to have a constitutional amendment. The same thing might be true with the wealth tax. We might have to have a constitutional amendment. It depends, of course, on the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, as it stands, is probably not very hospitable to the idea of a wealth tax. But then there's also the issue people are worried about capital flight. I think there are measures that one can take regarding that. Yeah.
There are certain things in the makeup of our laws right now that partly is governed by the interpretations of the Supreme Court of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Which have been extremely effective in skewing our society in the very unequal way, that we have now. Now it's easy to say that we can have a constitutional amendment to get rid of them, but constitutional amendments take years and years and years to pass.
Sure.
I mean, it would be relatively rapid passage of a constitutional, but if it took 7 years to pass, for example. And of course, we have only 10 years to get things done.
Yeah.
So how should we act to stop the Supreme Court from standing in our way is basically the question I'm raising.
Yeah. Well, this problem came up also during the Great Depression with Roosevelt, of course.
Yes.
And, he raised the question of so-called packing the court.
Yes. Which
one can do because, the number of justices has varied in our history. It is determined by Congress. Congress determines a lot regarding the composition of the Supreme Court and can change it. And although Roosevelt never actually succeeded in or had to do what he had, the court itself changed its tune through some retirements and the like. That is something that could be done. I think the Supreme Court itself should be reformed in various respects. I think it's a bad idea to have lifetime appointments. I think there should be limited terms. In other countries also, you don't have Supreme Court justices being appointed through political means.
Yes.
They're appointed through bodies of other judges with a little bit of oversight. But I think, we do want to have the independence of the court, but on the other hand, the court has to be thinking about constitutional interpretation as being governed not by things like original intent, but by how we can coherently interpret the Constitution in a way that fits what accords with justice.
Yeah, that
fulfilled our freedom.
Allows us to society.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what we want. That's what we want our justices to do
in various ways.
And I think it's important to have a certain kind of rotation in the court on a regular basis, so that one political faction that may influence their appointment is not able to lock us into something for 50 years.
Right.
As Trump
can
may be doing.
act the court.
Yeah.
If we want to, we could increase the size of the court.
Yeah.
For example, to 15 people.
Yeah.
It's had a variety, not a large variety, but a few different sizes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since the Constitution was passed. There's also something else that we can do. Article 3, Section 2, but contains an exceptions clause where Congress can actually prohibit the appellate courts from hearing certain kinds of cases or disputes, just specifying in the bill that these will not be reviewed by any appellate courts. Okay. And so in certain instances, that can be used. But for example, with respect to federal campaign finance laws, if Congress wants to pass some new laws, of that sort, it could put in that sort of clause, the exceptions clause, which would put the Supreme Court out of the game. Okay. Meanwhile, Congress could also move to pass a constitutional amendment in order to ratify the change that it had made in the law. But that would be a situation where there was eventually a constitutional amendment, but also where for the short term, you had the exceptions clause stopping the court doing the kinds of things it has been doing, which make no sense, from the standpoint of the democracy that we are supposed to be, in theory. So that sort of thing, can also be done in order to check the Supreme Court, which I think has gone much too far.
I mean, I think given the crises that are bearing down on us, if the Supreme Court proves to be an obstacle to changes that are backed by a legislature and a president, I think it will be difficult for the Supreme Court to stand its own ground and not be subject to these kind of measures. So that even if the court is in a way, and the judicial system is being filled with people, as Trump has been doing it, and as Republican legislators have prevented Obama from filling court appointments.
Yes, I remember it well.
I mean, I think that hopefully, if we make the proper kind of history come November, and we have a control of both houses of Congress and a president who's willing to tackle these problems and institute the fulfillment of our social rights, I think the obstacle of the Supreme Court can be overcome. At least I'm hopeful that it can be.
So do I. But I think in this case, the president would have to be willing to take on the kinds of measures that we've been talking about. And so it really remains to be seen whether Bernie Sanders would be willing to take that on. He's probably the only one who would even consider doing it. Well, we've been here for a little over an hour and a half.
Okay, sure.
Would you like to continue, or?
Well, let me say this. I just want to let the audience know that if they want to find out more about my campaign, I do have a campaign website, which is winfieldforsenate.com. That's all spelled out, WINFIELDFOR Senate.com. And also look at my social media presence, and if you can, spread the word. I'm obviously not the darling of the establishment. I'm not going to have the same resources as many of the other candidates. It's going to be a long uphill battle for me.
Right. So, but Facebook has a description
Hmm.
for this particular stream, and I left the links for Richard,
Okay.
the Winfield for Senate .com link, and Winfield for Senate .com/issues.
Yeah.
And I also left his YouTube channel for you
Okay.
as well. So all you have to do is click on the links in the description,
Okay.
and you'll be right there. Okay, and there's, I would suppose, a campaign finance button that's on your website, okay, as well, if people care to donate.
Sure. There's a donate button. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay. Well, it's good speaking to you. You know, I have events to go to early tomorrow morning, and
Okay.
maybe now's the time to uh, stop our conversation for the time being. But I hope we can resume it later at some point.
Certainly resume it later. Okay, I very much enjoyed having you back,
Okay.
and I think we had a very, very successful stream. Okay, so I will let you go now. Okay, I'll take you out of the broadcast.
Okay.
And
Well, thank you for having me. And it's a good opportunity. You know, it's rare to find opportunities to speak at length about policy.
I know.
I mean, I must say my experience as a candidate is one where at Democratic Party events, they really don't really want to have any extended political discussion. They give candidates 5 minutes, sometimes 2 minutes. There's rarely discussion afterwards. And of course, outside of such gatherings, it's also very hard to get more than a soundbite or an elevator speech anywhere. So this is a rare opportunity. I hope there are more of them.
Okay, so just to make to summarize once again, you are running for the Senate of the United States.
Yes.
As the senator from the state of Georgia.
Yes.
And right now, the senator who has been appointed to replace Johnny Isaac was by Kelly Loeffler, right?
Correct.
But she, is temporarily in the office, and you will likely be running against her, right?
She's definitely in the race. Doug Collins is in the race. And there are so far 4 other Democrats in the race. And it's not yet clear when the registration deadline is for entering the race. So we'll see when that gets figured out. But I will stick with it, and I hope to get the message out.
Strange election in Georgia. Okay, it's a jungle election.
Yeah.
Okay, and then is it the top 2 people have a runoff?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Probably in December, maybe even in January. It's not completely determined yet.
Okay, so it's a strange election. One more question that I meant to ask you about it. Is there likely to be cheating in the election from Brian Kemp?
Well, you know, already he's doing what had been done in the last election in 2018, namely, many people are being stricken from the voting rolls for allegedly not having voted in the last election or so. These tend to be predominantly African Americans and others who would vote Democratic. There's also the problem that in districts that have heavier likely Democratic voters, they're providing fewer voting machines.
Yes.
They're restricting the number of polling places and restricting their hours and how long early voting will take place.
Yes, the usual voter suppression.
Yeah. And then there's the issue of new voting machines. They've introduced these new voting machines that are supposed to be an improvement on the past, which were hackable and had certain irregularities that remain to be explored. These have printers attached to them that give you a piece of paper that allegedly records your vote, but the record that is used to confirm the voting consists in a barcode, which has to be read by a program machine. So that means it is all susceptible of hacking.
Sure.
So there are a lot of, possibilities out there. And it's
Okay, so thank you very much for
okay.
once
Okay,
again.
great. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for all the listeners who endured all of this discussion.
Oh, they haven't endured. They're still here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great.
Okay, thanks again, Richard.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so I'm back, and I'm going to take just a few more minutes because we haven't had a chance to go over any of the comments. I'm not going to read them all off here, but I hope you like this. I thought it was a wonderful interview. Okay, it's actually Professor Winfield. He's a philosophy professor from the University, of Georgia. He's been very active in Democratic circles down there for years. He previously ran for the Congress in 2018, and he had a wonderful platform then, and he has a wonderful platform now. And I've linked to the issues page, his issues page, so you can check it out there. It's very thorough. It is very comprehensive. It has much in common with Bernie Sanders, and where it differs from Bernie, it usually goes further than Bernie. So he is a wonderful man. I believe I first heard about him way back in 2017, but 2018 from Lana Dell. So thank you, Lana, for introducing him to me in the first place. And Russell Gallman also mentioned him at that time. So thank you, Russell, as well. And I see you both are here tonight, and that is very good. So I'm not going to read all your comments tonight, but I was particularly taken with Steve's comment when he said he had a terrible problem. And that is, people think he looks like he is Brad Pitt. They think he's Brad Pitt. So what should he do? So I replied and I said, just smile, Steve. Smile. Anyway, I was taken with that comment. But thank you for all your comments. I see a lot of comments here. And the discussion, was very good also. And I hope that you will agree with me that Richard is one of the best candidates in the country for the Senate, bar none, from the standpoint of his heart, his ideas, and his understanding of the issues, and his agenda, his policy agenda. He is truly in line with the best ideas of what the public purpose is. And Lana says, "Oh, you two sure are loaded with books. I'm afraid we're not as loaded as I used to be at one time because we've had to move into a very small apartment in the last 4 years or so. And I had to get rid of half my books. And before that, we moved out of our house actually quite a long time ago. And then again, I had to get rid of a lot of my books. So over the years, I probably have left about 1/8 of the books that I used to have. But he's like he's got a very big library, so he's probably still got all his books. Lucky man. Okay, Evelina says, sure is the best candidate for the presidency. For the Senate. Yeah, he sure is the best one for the Senate. I mean, I think he'd be a hell of a candidate for the presidency if he could ever get funded. But I think he probably has to get to the Senate first. So whatever we can do to help him to get to the Senate, that would be great. Russell says it'd be nice to have Nabila for Congress visit for a convo too. She was recently given an endorsement by Representative Ilhan Omar. If she got an endorsement, okay, from Ilhan Omar, she must be very good indeed. I'd certainly consider, okay, an interview if she would like me to interview her. Sometimes, okay, I worry about things because while we've been growing, and for this broadcast, we were at roughly 15 and over for the whole hour and 3/4, okay, that we've been on. That may not be enough people for some people to take their time to come here, okay, and be interviewed. Okay, especially when I'm usually very thorough, okay, in my interviews. Okay, this was a pretty easy one for Richard because we basically come from the same place, and our views are very, very, very similar. But sometimes I can ask people questions that are very hard questions for them to answer. It depends on the people. But if you've watched some of the other interviews I did in 2017 and 2018, I was not always so easy to get along with. I wasn't always so mellow as I am now. And Russ asks, will that be sufficient enough to drive the currency, though? Oh, you're talking about the taxes that Richard was suggesting. Yeah, I think it will be sufficient. It's going to be a lot of tax money. And remember, there are still sales taxes. There are still sales taxes, and people will need to have money in order to take care of the sales taxes. Kathy says, great talk. Thanks, Joe and Richard. Best wishes, Richard. Wish we had more like you. I wish we did, too. I certainly wish we did. Lana, I think we answered your question of who Richard was trying to replace. And it's Johnny Isaacson, but actually more recently it's by Kelly Loeffler, who was appointed for the rest of Johnny Isaacson's term and is the current senator. So I will now be saying good night. I hope you enjoyed this. And I'll be seeing you again tomorrow, and I'll have some very interesting things to talk about at that time. But as you see, I now have the interview capability. I decided I'd worked hard enough on the technical problem of fooling around with the finicky balance of all the sound sources. So I decided just to take this to a platform that was completely different for the interviews. So now I'm on the StreamYard platform for the interviews. I'll still be using the XSplit, though, for other shows that do not involve interviews. So thank you very much for coming. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you do too. Good night. See you tomorrow night.